Welcome back to Tabletop Glory. My name is Graham Johnson, and today we're going to be painting a halfling from Reaper Miniatures. Now, I took a lot of inspiration from everybody's tricksy little Hobbit. No, I'm actually going to be focusing on Bilbo and not Frodo, but that is because my inspiration comes from Bilbo's outfit in The Hobbit. So I'm going to be kind of focusing my color schemes based on his outfit. Even though the miniature doesn't look exactly like him, I did take quite a bit of inspiration from him. If you want to go ahead and pick this miniature up for yourself, you can go over to Reaper Miniatures and get it there. I believe they call the miniature Snitch. If you want to go ahead and type in Halfling Snitch, you should be able to find them quite easily. Now, that being said, I wanted to do a little bit of an experiment on this miniature. And by an experiment, I really mean I'm just going to be starting from black and working my way up through the highlights. Now, if you've been following the channel for any amount of time, you've probably seen me do something like this before. Usually, I'm just kind of doing this to a tabletop standard, and today I'd like to consider this a tabletop plus or even a plus plus. But I wanted to kind of keep this in mind as I'm working through from black up into the highlights, because I've recently seen a lot of other miniature content creators both here on YouTube and on Twitch and on TikTok, and they all kind of say the same thing, that if you're doing a competition piece, starting from black and working your way through the highlights is the superior way to go. Now, going into this miniature initially, my brain was thinking, that makes a lot of sense, especially if you're doing non-metallic metal, which I presume most people who are painting for competitions are probably going to be doing. It's going to make it a lot easier to see where your shadows are and where your highlights are, and really get that sharp contrast for non-metallic metal, as well as for lighting effects like OSL. But that said, can doing this on a miniature that is intended to be a game piece be a hindrance or not? Because typically when we zenithally highlight, that is so that we can visually see where our highlights and our shadows are going to end up. And with gaming pieces, we typically do what I refer to as heroic lighting, which can oftentimes mean that we're putting highlights in places that don't make sense, but look good on the model. So can we kind of combine these worlds? Personally, I think yes. And I thought that going in, and I still think that now. But I had a lot of fun painting this model, so let's get on with what I did. Now, if I'm being completely honest with you guys, this guy has been sitting in my pile of shame for a while. I pull him out every now and again, and I always say I'm either going to paint him as Bilbo or I'm going to paint him as any number of the hobbits within the Lord of the Rings franchise. But I always get inspired by something else, or the idea for the video doesn't work with a small model, and then I inevitably put him away and paint something else. And I've seen a lot of Hobbit and Lord of the Rings content on my For You page recently, and I pulled him out, and I just, you know what? Today was the day. In any case, you guys have seen my inspiration photo, so I don't really need to explain why I'm choosing what colors and where they're going, but we're just going to talk through the process. Right now, I'm kind of just putting on a basic layer as our base tone. Now, I end up doing about 2 to 3 coats of paint, and you'll notice that I'm painting quite thin layers, and that's because there's a lot of detail on this guy, and I really don't want to muddle that up by accidentally putting on a thick coat and then maybe losing a wrinkle in the fabric or losing a detail on one of the belts or something. And that's really important, I feel, when you're painting small stuff. You've really got to keep those details in mind, and you have to paint in nice thin layers, or else a lot of the details just kind of go away. And I feel like that's universal across all miniatures, but especially when painting something small like a hobbit or a halfling, you've really got to take that into consideration. Now, I started out with Lauren Forest, and then I kind of blended in darker greens into the shadow in this case, instead of doing it the other way around like I did with the rest of the model, where I started with my darkest color and blended up into my highlights, and I thought that would just work a little bit better with the shirt. That's really the only reason why I did that. So, well, although I do go brighter than Lauren Forest, I also go darker than Lauren Forest, and I actually use 3 or 4 different greens when mixing those colors up, and I'm treating them more like glazes than I am actual layers, where I'm doing 5 or 6 passes with really thin down paints in order to build up the highlights and the shadows. And ultimately, that may have been a little bit lost on the shirt just because there's so little of it visible. However, I think where that same mindset really kind of pops out was when I started working on the cloak. Now, I initially based the cloak in Screamer Pink, and that is the darkest red that I own without adding some black to it. Now, I do add a little bit of black for the deepest shadows on the bottom of the cloak, as well as kind of just doing a light edging around all of the parts where the cloak kind of interacts with itself and other parts of the model, as a way of just kind of darkening and deepening those cracks to really make the cloak feel like it's on top of the character instead of sculpted on it. Now, this is a technique that I've actually picked up from Scott the Miniature Maniac, and if you're not familiar with him, I don't know why you wouldn't be. He's all over miniature painting YouTube, so go check him out because he's awesome. He's honestly the reason why I got into painting miniatures. But in any case, I picked that technique up from him, and this is one of the first miniatures I really used it on, and I gotta say, I'm probably gonna do it more often. It was a bit of a pain in the butt to do, but I feel like once you kind of get a technique down for getting nice, thin, crispy lines, it's going to add a lot to the miniature that you may not initially realize is there until you get a really good look at it, and it's going to add a lot of depth. One of the next things I wanted to do is go ahead and clean up the pouch that was on top of the shirt. The sculpting, although meets directly with the shirt, it kind of had a bit of a curve to it. I suspect this is to make it easier to pull out of the mold, which meant that I really wanted to define well where the end of the bag was, where the belts, the hand holding the bag, it connecting with the shirt. I wanted to define that well early on so that as I continued to build up highlights, I didn't need to worry about what was shirt and what was leather and so on and so forth. Moving on to the pants and everything else that's leather, I ended up deciding to go with a much warmer brown that had a bit of red in it, and I was trying to do this as a way of bringing red into the rest of the miniature, even if you don't quite realize that the red is there. I also thinned this down into a glaze and used that on the bag because I'm using the same color that I use for the bag, XV88, as my highlight color for a lot of the other leathers. And this is just a way of bringing these colors back into the miniature in other ways so that they all complement each other while still making the miniature look like he's covered in a lot of different types of leather, i.e. the belts, the bag he's holding, the gloves, making it all look like it's made out of different materials, even though I used the exact same paints. Now you're gonna notice one thing right off the bat. I'm going pretty extreme on my highlights, and that's partially because I feel like you have to when building up from a black, and as well as on this cloak, if the base red is as dark as I want to go, I've got to go kind of extreme on my highlights, not to mention the fact that once this dries, it's going to really settle down. And so I end up actually doing about 4 coats of every layer of red just to not just blend things in, but to really sell home those highlights. And I really, really like how it turns out in the end. Second verse, same as the first. Honestly, building up the different colors of the leather and the shirt, I'm trying to follow that more extreme highlight to go along with this black base tone. And honestly, I'm really liking how it's coming together. Like I said, I probably spent a little too much time highlighting the shirt and kind of picking out the edges of the leather, but honestly, I'm really happy with the model at the end of the day, so I guess spending all that extra time is really worthwhile. Though all that having been said, that is just my personal opinion, and at the end of the day, when you are painting your models, there is no rhyme or reason as to how much time or how little time you should be spending on painting your models. It's up to you to have fun with your toys the way that you see fit. So if you want to spend as little time painting as possible so that you can get them on the table and play with them, or even if you just want to play with them unpainted, that's cool too. I happen to just enjoy spending probably a little bit too much time painting the finer details because that's what I get joy out of. Now, I want to apologize because I did a bit of a bad job recording the first part of painting the Hobbit's face, but I do want to just explain that I base coated all of the flesh with Bugman's Glow from Citadel, and then I highlighted up using about 2 to 3 thin coats of Kislev flesh. Once that completely dried, I ended up doing just a little bit of touch up with Kislev flesh just on the bridge of the nose, the chin, and the cheeks, just to kind of make sure that all the facial features that need to pop. As you can see in the footage that I did kind of record, again, I'm really sorry about how bad a job I did here. I did just dot the eyes with a generic white. I don't really enjoy trying to put a pupil in the eye on a miniature. For me, I feel like that's just one detail a little too much, which I know is funny coming from me considering the fact that I try to paint as many details as I can. But for some reason, that's just one that I feel isn't needed. I think just a little dot of white goes a long way for the eyes. And honestly, when it's sitting on the tabletop, it's not really going to matter much. I'm not planning to enter this into a competition, and I think not putting a iris in a microscopic eyeball is going to be worth my time, and that's just my personal opinion. Now, I decided to go ahead and cut a little bit of footage out here just to save you on a bit of time, and that's just me painting up the final little details like the belt buckles and things. You'll see that in the final result, but that's stuff that you guys can all kind of make up on your own. If you're following along at home, just decide on whether you want all your little metal bits to be silver or gold. Now, I did try to replicate some kind of blue glow effect on the sword to replicate the sting. And although it's not perfect, I do like how it turned out. I think it gives it a little bit of charm and character, not being necessarily perfect. But that said, I used some little cobblestones that you guys have seen me do before. They're made out of plaster. I make them with a mold that I have. And then in between that, I went ahead and laid down some dirt effects. Now, whatever kind of basing paste that you want to use for this is absolutely fine. And then, of course, add any kind of grass tufts. Now, I will say this. Typically, I would have put down the basing paste and then mashed the stones down into that. But with as many as I wanted to put on the base, for some reason, I thought it would be smart to do it the other way around and just made a lot more work for myself. So if you're doing something similar at home, learn from my mistakes. Don't put the stones down first. It's just going to be a lot more work for you in the end. Although, again, as I've said throughout the course of this video, I had a lot of fun working on this miniature. So I guess at the end of the day, giving myself a little extra work is not the end of the world. And here we are with our final results. Now, that black wash that I tucked into the crevices is a little on the shiny side, and I will do a little bit of touch up with some kind of matte varnish to try and clear that up. Going forward, if I do this again, I think I will add matte varnish to that wash just so that stuff like this doesn't happen again. Ultimately, I'm really happy with this. Now, there are a few little final touches that I want to add to the base, like adding a little treasure chest and some touches of grass and things like that, but I'm going to be saving that for a YouTube short, so keep an eye out for that coming real soon. Regardless, I hope that you guys have really enjoyed today's video. I tried out a lot of stuff today that was brand new for me, and I hope that you guys found today's video really enjoyable and took something away from that. Regardless, thank you so much for watching, and as always, may your display case always be filled and your pile of shame never run empty. Until next time.